Got it. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. My name is John Urgo, and I am the Planning and Development Director for Santa Cruz Metro. We're excited to have you all here as we kick off a series of public events aimed at gathering input on our Reimagine Metro planning effort. This effort is the first comprehensive examination of Metro's routes and services in about 7 years, and under a very different lens than the 2016 effort, which was primarily focused on service cuts. We came to you in April. We asked about general perceptions, priorities, desires for the Metro system. We heard a lot about frequency and reliability. We put all of the feedback we gathered into 2 alternatives, one of which, or a hybrid, we plan to implement in December. And we're here to gather your feedback on that plan. Due to accelerated bus operator recruitment, we anticipate being able to increase service 10% by the end of the year under either of the plans. And we'll be coming back to you in the fall to help us plan an even more expanded network should additional operational resources become available. So I'm gonna, in a minute, pass it off to the team to implement the plan. Hang on, or to talk about the plan, but are you admitting people, Selena? Or, you are? Okay, good. I didn't know if I had to do that. Apologies. But I'll just close by saying that last year, Santa Cruz Metro set 3 very ambitious goals. 1, double ridership in 5 years. 2, only purchase zero-emission buses going forward. And 3, develop nearly 200 units of affordable housing on Metro-owned property. And since we met in April, Metro has secured over $60 million in state and federal grants to transition more than half of our fleet to zero-emission buses in the coming 1 to 2 years, implement rapid bus enhancements on the Silk Hub corridor, and develop over 175 units of affordable housing at Pacific Station and the Watsonville Transit Center. The plan we're presenting today is directly tied to the doubling ridership goal, and we're extremely excited to work with everyone here who could attend, those who will be meeting in the coming months or in the coming weeks during the summer to develop a fast, frequent, world-class transit system throughout Santa Cruz County that we've heard so much in the first round of outreach. So with that, I'll pass it off to Daniel from the project team.
All right. Well, thank you, John. Appreciate it. My name's Daniel Costantino. I'm a consultant. I work for a firm called JWA, or Jarrett Walker and Associates, based in Portland, Oregon. I'm here to present to you what we're doing on this Reimagine Metro project. And I'm just going to quickly double check that I've got the correct version of this presentation, because I'd rather be safe than sorry. I do. Okay. So today's meeting, we're going to begin with a presentation that I'm going to give right now. And after this presentation, there'll be a question and comment period. And in that time, we'll answer as many relevant questions as we're able to without being here until too late. If you'd like to submit a question or comment, either as I'm presenting or after I'm done, you can either submit it in the chat. Please send it to Selena Barlow. She's the moderator. You should be able to see her in the participant list. If you would like to submit it in writing, or if you'd like to speak after I'm done with the presentation, you can also raise your hand, which is an option that's available in the reactions menu. As I give the presentation and throughout the rest of the meeting, all participants will be muted. And we will, if we call on you because you've raised your hand and you have a question, then you'll be unmuted and be able to ask your question at that time. But we're trying to keep things as smooth as possible, so we'll have it that way for today. Thanks very much for your time. I appreciate your being here. So let me start now talking about this project. What is Reimagine Metro? So what's happening is that as part of its larger goals of massively increasing ridership, Santa Cruz Metro is re-envisioning in the very short term where and how often buses should be running. And so as part of that effort, we're thinking about increasing ridership. But to get there, we're also thinking about the steps we have to take, which include increasing the amount of service provided, making transit more reliable and making transit routes more relevant to the needs of the community, adapt to current travel patterns, not the travel patterns of 2019, ultimately all with the goal of creating a network of bus routes that are useful and attractive for many people and many people's trips. So as we do this, we are proceeding in kind of two different timeframes. The one I'm going to talk about most today is what Metro can do by the end of this year. So we are targeting significant service changes to get implemented in December. And we are looking for input from the public on those possible service changes. And that's the bulk of what I'll be presenting today. At the same time, this project is focusing on envisioning how Metro could take advantage of additional funding, more operators, future infrastructure to create a better service and eventually reach that goal of a world-class transit network. So as far as who's working on this, obviously we are headed by Santa Cruz Metro staff, John Urgo, Planning Director, as well as the Planning Department in general. We've also worked with other departments. We worked with people throughout the organization. The project is kind of being organized and shepherded by the consultant team, which is led by Jarrett Walker and Associates, JWA, that's the firm I work for, and our partners at AMA Transit Planning who are assisting us with the public outreach process. In the course of this work, we're also collaborating with a broad range of local governments and agencies. So some of that has included work where we've involved at various points the cities that are in the county, as well as the Regional Transportation Committee and the University of California, Santa Cruz. In terms of who we are as a consultant team and why we should be working on this as a whole, let me just tell you, so this is really, this kind of project where we re-envision where and how often the buses go is what our firm is very much specialized in. We've done it in a lot of places. I have personally been the project manager for 3 of the 4 projects that are listed here, including in Monterey, Salinas, and Madison, Wisconsin, both projects that have been implemented in the last 8 months and that we worked on over the last couple of years, all resulting in significant increases in where people can get to in a reasonable amount of time. So far on this project, we've done a couple things. We started by analyzing the data about the county, where people live, where they work, what people need to do, what kind of places there are to get to, how all of that works, as well as how all of that demand and need is satisfied or not by the current transit network. At the same time, we've done a lot of outreach to stakeholder organizations, to riders directly. We recruited riders through a survey so that we could then have focus groups with them and focus groups with stakeholder organizations to understand the community's experience and opinions about transit. And actually, even before we started all of this work, Metro conducted a public poll in the fall of 2022, where they polled a representative sample of county residents about what people's opinions, perceptions, and needs are for transit in the county. Most recently, back in May actually, we held a network design workshop that included all the project partners that I listed above. And that's resulted in the alternatives and proposals that I'm going to be showing you today. All of this process that I'm talking about is described in great detail in a document called the Alternatives Report, which is available at the project website at scmtd.com/reimaginemetro. So if you're interested, but you want more detail, or I went too fast and you missed something that mattered to you, you can read it all and more in this report. So at this point, having learned about your community, learned about your transit network, talked to people, done the outreach, and developed this report, we want to show you what's on the table and get your input and the community at large's input on what should be done by the end of this year and what priorities should be for future service improvements. Some of the highlights of what we've heard so far from the community are unsurprisingly that it takes far too long to get places using transit. And that's due to a few things, including long waits, slow speeds, and occasional missed trips. We also have heard from a large section of people that there isn't enough service being provided right now. We know that from the data itself, Metro is providing less service than it did a few years ago, about 13% less service than in 2019, and actually 30% less service than in 2002. So there's a need for more service. We also heard a very broad range of concerns about communications, fares, service reliability, weekend and evening service, bicycle bus connections, overcrowding, and many other topics, which I won't necessarily get to in detail, but I want to acknowledge that we've heard them and they're part of how we're thinking. Two important points from the public poll I mentioned earlier that I'd like to put to the forefront in before showing you the proposals are about really what Metro's priorities should be in this process. And so back in the fall, we asked a number of questions in this public poll. And one of these was about whether it was more important to focus on having very frequent and convenient service that would be available, but perhaps only in the areas where the most people travel, or having service to as many places as possible, even if it's not all that frequent. And although there are many people who answered in either direction, there are clearly many more people in the county who feel that frequent service in places where the most people travel should be a higher priority. So that's one thing that we've kept in mind. Another question we asked was about whether transit should focus more on equity or equality. So we were asking whether transit should be focusing more on meeting the needs of communities where many people have low incomes or don't have a car, or instead whether transit should be available to some extent everywhere, regardless of need, because it's a general public service. And on that, we got similarly high margin of people telling us that focusing on the needs of low-income people, focusing on the needs of areas where many people don't have a car should probably be a higher priority. So this is not an absolute, but it is something that we've kept in mind throughout our work. With that said, let me get a little bit into what we're actually putting forward. So here, to start us off, is a map of the existing Metro transit network in the core areas of Santa Cruz County. So this is basically the area from UCSC in the west to Watsonville in the east and everything in between. Thing you'll see on this map are lines, and that these lines have colors. The colors of these lines indicate how often the bus comes, typically on a weekday. Dark blue colors are buses that come every 30 minutes. Light blue means a bus that comes just once an hour. And if it's a shade of kind of brown or gold, and maybe you have to squint a little bit to see it, that's a bus that comes less than once an hour. Maybe it just comes a few times a day. And so if you look at this network, you can clearly see right from the beginning that there is in fact no service that comes more often than every 30 minutes right now throughout the daytime. And so we know that that's one key issue. We also know that this isn't all the service Metro provides. Metro does in fact operate north of Santa Cruz. And so this map here shows that. So we know that there's service out to the San Lorenzo Valley on routes 35 and 35E, and the Highway 17 express service to Scotts Valley, as well as the 40, 41, and 42 out to West County. So looking at this network, what are things that are very clear and that are issues? One thing we know is that there's less service than in the past, as I mentioned. We know that there's a lot of buses, well, all buses are relatively infrequent because none of them come more than once every half hour. And so these infrequent buses, particularly hourly or less, require very long waits. And that's a universal issue throughout the county. In some areas where there's very high demand, only having a bus every half hour, every hour also means that there's overcrowding. And that's particularly an issue on the west side in the UCSC area. We also know, looking at this map, that there are many areas where it can be very difficult to understand the service and how to get from A to B. There are 3 different routes that go from east to west throughout the county between Santa Cruz and Watsonville. They all go to downtown Santa Cruz, Cabrillo College, and Watsonville, but they all go to a whole lot of different places in between, and they don't serve any of those places particularly often. Watsonville also is an area where there's very complex service, lots of routes, none of them coming very soon. We also know that there are issues with speeds and with reliability. Metro has been working separately on some of those east-west reliability issues. And we also know from the public poll that the public is really ready for change. People are ready to contemplate change. It feels urgent to many of the people we've talked to, and that's why we're doing this. So in terms of what Metro can do this year, there are certain limits. Metro can't solve every possible problem this year. It can't double ridership this year, but Metro can do some pretty significant things. So today I'm going to show you 2 different alternatives for how Metro could proceed. They're fairly similar. They have a lot of common points and a few key differences, but what both alternatives include, by the end of this year is, first of all, an increase in service, about a 10% increase in service overall. That's linked to how many more drivers Metro thinks it can hire by the end of the year, which is how many buses it can have out on the road. So if recruitment goes well, perhaps it could be slightly more as well, but 10% feels pretty solid. That extra service and current service would be reallocated with the goal of providing higher frequency in areas that experience higher demand, and to provide simpler and more direct routes wherever possible, but especially in Watsonville where the service is particularly complex. We're also looking at what we can do to provide better transfers with shorter waits. So part of that is about higher frequencies. So if you arrive at a random time to your transfer, you won't have to wait as long for the second bus. And part of that in Watsonville is about time transfers, getting all the buses to arrive at the same time and leave at the same time at the transit center. So you're never waiting that long for your connection. We're also looking at implementing no second fare. So if you need to transfer buses, there wouldn't be a fare. You wouldn't have to pay for the bus twice. So with that, here we are back at the map of existing service that I showed you. And I'm going to next show you maps of the two alternatives. So I'm going to start by showing you alternative A. And I'm going to give you a brief description of what you're looking at and why it's so different. And then I'll flip back and forth so you can see the degree of change. So here's existing service, and here's alternative A. First thing you might notice looking at this map is that there are a couple new colors here. And so I want to make sure that that's very clear what those colors mean. A line in red on this map means a bus that comes about every 15 minutes on weekdays in the daytime. A line in purple is about every 10 to 20 minutes. So if you get there randomly, it's probably about every 20 minutes. Dark blue is still a bus every 30 minutes. Light blue still every 60. Gold still just a few times a day. So I'm going to flip back and forth so you can see the degree of general change. Existing, alternative A. Existing, alternative A. Existing, and alternative A. So obviously there's a whole lot to absorb here, and I don't expect you to get it all just from looking at this one map, and I'll show you slightly more zoomed in maps in a minute. But really key points here are generally a higher focus on frequency, getting as much frequency as we can out of the network. Some reductions in coverage to certain areas to help pay for that, in addition to the additional service. And some changes to routes and route names and route numbers. You can't make big changes without making big changes. So if it looks startling, that's because that's kind of the degree of change that's needed if you want to achieve some of these goals. However, alternative A isn't the only way you can go. We made, after drawing alternative A, we realized that some of what's happening here may be perhaps slightly too much change or slightly too radical. And so there is an alternative B that is moderately different from alternative A, which I'm going to show you now. So here's alternative A. And now here's alternative B. And I'm going to go back and forth a couple times again. A, B, A, and B. So I think to explain really the difference between the existing service and the alternatives, and to do it fairly, I need to look at this in a little bit more zoomed in way. So now I'm going to take you through different parts of the county so that you can understand what's going on in each of these alternatives. In Santa Cruz, what we are looking to do here is to, first of all, an alternative A, we are trying to maximize the amount of service and the frequency of service going to UCSC, because that is by far the highest ridership area in the network. It's the area where there is the most overcrowding, and we know that service on UCSC is very irregular right now, both in the actual schedule and in its operations. So we're trying to even out those operations by essentially taking all of the buses on Route 10 and Route 15, that's on High Street, and part of the buses on Bay Street, and turning all of those buses into 18s and 19s. And so the consequence is that there would be much more regular buses on campus. There'd be more frequency on most of the west side, but there would be no service along High Street. So there's a coverage consequence to get this frequency. At the same time, we're also looking at one change for buses that head up towards the San Lorenzo Valley. Right now, the 35, some buses are the regular 35s and others are the E's that make a deviation via the Emmeline complex. That would no longer be the case. All 35s would go straight up Highway 17 to Scotts Valley, not going by Emmeline. Emmeline complex would still be served, however, it's an important social services location, by Route 4, which would come back to a pattern that it served before, where it serves the Harvey West area first, coming out of downtown, and then serves Emmeline. On the east side, we are trying to consolidate the service that's currently on Water and Soquel into just running on one of the two. And for the purposes of this alternative, we've chosen Water Street because there are more people within a half mile of Water Street than Soquel Avenue, although it's not necessarily a final decision. Water Street has been chosen to take routes 1 and 2, which are replacing, roughly speaking, routes 69 and 71 to Cabrillo and Watsonville. Those would operate together every 15 minutes all the way to Capitola Road before splitting. For service in the Seabright areas and heading towards Twin Lakes and Portola, the 66 and 68 would be merged into this Route 3, which would serve many of the same areas currently served by those buses, but miss a few, like 7th Avenue. But by merging the two routes, we'd be able to have it run every 30 minutes. So that's in the general Santa Cruz and I guess parts of the east side area. Going to alternative B in this area would be very similar to alternative A, but with a couple key differences. First of all, alternative B doesn't cut service on High Street. It does keep regularized service on UCSC every 15 minutes on both directions of the loop, but it keeps service on High Street, and it makes that possible by reducing service on Bay Street. So you get more coverage and you get a little bit less frequency as a result. Other than that, the only major difference in this area between alternative A and B is that alternative B keeps something closer to the 66 and 68 on the east side, where you'd have a 3A that does Seabright and Twin Lakes and a 3B that does 7th and Bromer Road. In Mid-County, so this is roughly speaking, for the purposes of this presentation, the area between Capitola Mall and Aptos. So the major difference here is that routes 69A, 69W, and 71 have been consolidated into routes 1 and 2. Routes 1 and 2 do many of the same things that the 69s and 71s do now, but they more consistently all do the same thing. In that, when the two routes join together, the two coming out of Capitola Mall, the one coming from Soquel Drive, they remerge together and operate all the way from 41st Avenue to State Park Drive by Cabrillo College. So you don't have to worry that you might miss a part of Soquel Drive if you get on the wrong 69. Those buses then continue past Cabrillo College, some of them serving Aptos Village along Soquel Drive, and others taking Highway 1 directly at State Park Drive, but both continue to Watsonville, all buses via Highway 1, which at most times of day is significantly faster than Freedom Boulevard. There'd still be service between Cabrillo College and Freedom Boulevard via a route called Route 73. However, that service wouldn't be as frequent in alternative A as it is now. It would be every 60 minutes instead of every 30 minutes because it's a lower demand area. Route 55 would be largely maintained in its existing form, serving Capitola Village, Cabrillo College, parts of Rio Del Mar, but then it would be extended to go all the way out to La Selva Beach. That's alternative A. Alternative B in this area, it would be fairly similar for the experience of people in this area. Alternative A and B would be pretty similar. The main difference is alternative B wouldn't include this Route 73. Instead, Route 2 would split at Freedom Boulevard, and some of the buses would do 2A, which would be like the old 71, and some of the buses would take Highway 1 into Watsonville. Also an alternative B, the 3 would be split into the 3A and 3B on 38th and 41st. So in existing service, there's a 66 on one of those streets and a 68 on the other. They're both only once an hour. In alternative A, there'd be just a bus every 30 minutes on 38th. In alternative B, we'd keep the split. In Watsonville, Watsonville, as you can see on the left, the map on the left right now, is an extremely complicated tangle of buses, none of which is coming more than once an hour. And so as a result, it's really complicated for anyone to figure out how to get from A to B on the bus. And if you just show up at a bus stop, there may be 3 different buses that might serve that bus stop. They're all going different places. And for several of these routes, they're going different places depending on which direction you're taking the bus. So it's pretty confusing. Buses don't come very often. It's pretty difficult to use. It's especially difficult to use if you're trying to get from A to B in a limited, defined amount of time. So what we have done in Watsonville in alternative A is proposed that a lot of these routes get simplified down into a route 1, which would serve probably some of the highest demand areas along Lincoln, Freedom, and Airport Boulevard out to the hospital every 30 minutes. A route 2 that would serve Main Street every 30 minutes. And both of those buses are going towards Cabrillo and Santa Cruz every 30 minutes via Highway 1. And then we would keep the 72 and 75 that exist right now along Green Valley Road, but we'd simplify them. They would take the same path in both directions as far as Freedom Center, and they'd be scheduled so you'd have a bus every 30 minutes on Green Valley Road consistently in both directions. We would replace the Watsonville Circulator with a route called the 78 that would serve a lot of the other areas not served by 1, 2, 72, and 75, and areas that don't get all-day service right now. The 78 would serve West Beach, Ohlone Parkway, the new County Social Services Facility at Westridge, and then it would go on via Pennsylvania into areas that are just a little bit farther from the main streets, eventually ending at the Social Security office in Watsonville Community Hospital. And Route 79 would change a little bit. It would be simplified. It would no longer use Martinelli in one direction so that the 2 directions of the route look more alike. And it would also come twice as often every 30 minutes instead of once an hour. So again, lots to absorb. I'll be happy to take some questions if some of this requires clarification. And you can also learn more about this in the report. In alternative A and B, they're quite similar from the point of view of Watsonville. The main difference is on Main Street. In alternative A, all Route 2 buses would serve Main Street every 30 minutes, continuing out towards Mid-County and Santa Cruz. In alternative B, half of Route 2 buses, the 2Bs, would use Main Street, and half of them would use Freedom Boulevard. So what that would mean is that in alternative B, there would be less frequent service on Main Street to going out towards Mid-County and Santa Cruz. However, alternative B would include a partial return of Route 91X. So at peak hours for about 3 or 4 hours in the morning and afternoon, Route 91X would exist, and it would actually be a complete express to Santa Cruz. It would be nonstop from Watsonville to Santa Cruz. So that's Watsonville. So all that's a lot of very detailed information. So let me back up for a second and go back to why we're doing this and why we should have to deal with this level of disturbance and change in the network in the first place, which is perfectly reasonable concern. So stepping back a little bit, although there's a lot of change on this map and a lot of things for me to describe about it, overall, the total number of people and jobs near service would stay about the same. However, buses might not be on exactly the same streets. The bus nearest you may go to slightly different places. But we've tried to focus on keeping the same areas covered and the same people covered. To the extent there's any difference between the 2 alternatives, alternative B provides a little bit more coverage than alternative A because we've split service to get to more places at the cost of having less frequency. Both alternatives would also significantly increase access to destinations, by which I mean how far you can get in a reasonable amount of time. So our analysis has shown that the average county resident could reach over 70% more jobs within 45 minutes on transit, and that 45 minutes includes walking and waiting time. So in terms of coverage and how this relates to equity, the chart I'm showing you now shows shows how transit coverage works as a percentage of the population of the urbanized areas in the county. So what it's showing you is that within the areas that are developed, basically all of Watsonville, Amnesty, everything from Aptos to Santa Cruz, most of the San Lorenzo Valley, all of that's included in here. So what it's showing is that within all of those areas, there's about 72% of people who are near some kind of service. Nobody is near any kind of frequent service, which would be indicated in red as on the maps. And just over a third of people are near service every 30 minutes or better. That's this top line. The next line shows the same thing, but for low-income residents. That's residents below 150% of the federal poverty level. And the next one shows it for people of color. And the last line shows how many jobs are near service. So about 70% of people in jobs in the county are near some form of service, but only about 30–40% are near service every 30 minutes. No one's near any kind of frequent service. In alternative A, we would get about 15–20% of people in jobs near service every 15 minutes or better. The total number of people within a half-mile service basically wouldn't change. And we would actually get more residents in poverty and more minority residents, people of color, near service every 30 minutes or better than today, and more than residents as a whole. So we've targeted these changes so that they make the most difference to the communities that need them potentially the most. That's alternative A. In alternative B, you see a similar overall outcome, slightly fewer people near frequent service, but about the same difference compared to existing service in coverage terms. So that's how coverage works and how it relates to equity for these alternatives. But again, what is transit for? What's the real reason we want to do this? And I think it's reasonable to say that the purpose of a transportation service is to help you get to more places in less time than you would be able to otherwise. And so we have really focused on how these changes would help people get to more places on transit in less time than they're able to today. So we use this measure, we call it access to opportunity or access to destinations. And here I'll just briefly show you how we calculate that. So first of all, imagine a person. Here's a person in front of you, that little icon, and we've shown this person in front of an empty field. If you're someplace transit runs, you're probably not in front of an empty field, or at least not in the middle of empty fields. You're in some kind of city or suburban area with many possible destinations that are perhaps within your reach. But of course, you have a problem any given day, which is that you only have a certain amount of time to get places. And so if places are beyond the area that you can reach in a reasonable amount of time, they may or may not actually matter to you. So you can imagine what a reasonable amount of time may be, and that'll change for everyone. But if we pretend that it's 45 minutes, you can draw on a map from pretty much anywhere how far you could get to in 45 minutes. And you can draw that for walking, for driving, for being on transit. And so we've done that for transit. And so we're able to tell, basically, based on how far people can get to, how many destinations can they actually reach. And so if you have the data, you can count this for jobs, you can count it for schools, you can count it for shopping. As it turns out, we mostly have data for jobs. So that's what I'll be presenting here, but that doesn't mean it's the only thing that's important. It's just what we're able to measure and show in this presentation at this time. When we say your travel time, if you say how many places you can get to in 45 minutes, I want to be really clear that we are including all elements of travel time. We know that just because you're going to use transit doesn't magically mean that you have more time. You may in fact have less. And so when you're counting your travel time, if you were going to drive or walk somewhere, you're going to think about your door-to-door travel time. And so similarly, when we're looking at transit travel time, we're looking at door-to-door time, which means that we're including the time it takes to walk to a bus stop. We're including the time that you might wait for a bus on average. We're including the time it takes for the bus to get there. And we're including any added time that may be involved in a transfer. And so based on that, we've made maps that show how far you can get now and how far you could get to in future from a variety of places. I'm going to show 3 places in this presentation that are generally representative, but you can find more maps if as needed, and I can show you more if there's specific places that you're interested in that I have one of these for. So the first of these places is downtown Watsonville. And so the maps on the right are showing how far you can get to today and how far you could get to in future on transit, door to door, within 45 minutes if you were starting at near the Watsonville Transit Center. And what this is showing you is areas that are basically in this pink grayish color are where you can get to today in 45 minutes, and in future you could still do that. Blue areas are areas where you can't get to today on transit, but you can get to if, in this case, alternative A were implemented. And pink areas are areas where you can get to today in 45 minutes or less, but you can't in future. So from downtown Watsonville, in both alternative A and alternative B, we see really significant increases in where people can get to within 45 minutes on transit. You can get to basically all of Watsonville in less than 45 minutes reliably. You can also, in both alternatives, get to Cabrillo College in 45 minutes or less reliably from downtown Watsonville. You can get farther than Cabrillo College, going further out towards Soquel in alternative A than alternative B, and that's because there is a higher frequency service on Main Street, which is the fastest path out of Watsonville. So on alternative A, there's a bus every 30 minutes out Main Street to Highway 1 to Soquel Drive, and that allows you to go farther than you can get to today. There is this pink area here along Freedom Boulevard in the area that is between Watsonville and Aptos. And that's because to make these improvements for the Watsonville to Cabrillo to Santa Cruz connection, while keeping within the budget that we had, the service on Rural Freedom Boulevard would be every 60 minutes instead of every 30 minutes. That's from downtown Watsonville. From Cabrillo College in Mid-County, well, what you can see from Cabrillo College, the big difference is that from Cabrillo College, you could get to most of Watsonville within 45 minutes in alternative A, and in alternative B, you could still get to a lot of Watsonville, basically anywhere near Airport Boulevard and Freedom Boulevard. There are small improvements towards general movement going towards the west, towards Santa Cruz and other parts of Capitola, Soquel, but not very significant. And there is, again, because of the reduction in frequency to rural Freedom Boulevard, less access to that area in both alternatives, I should add. And then from the point of view of Santa Cruz, the big difference here is that because of the added frequency, both on the west side and on Water Street on the east side, there would be some improvement to east-west connections. It's not perfect. By the end of this year, it's not clear that Metro will be able to through route buses that start from the west side from UCSC out to the east side. We're still working on that. So this assumes that's not possible, but there is an improvement that comes simply from the fact that higher frequency means less time waiting for the first bus and less time waiting for the second bus. There's also, because of the higher frequency, generally faster travel times between UCSC and most of the west side. That's especially true in alternative A, where there are 2 routes on the west side every 15 minutes. So the overall change in access terms here is that in alternative A, about half of county residents live in areas where access to jobs would increase significantly and noticeably by more than 5,000 additional jobs you could reach within 45 minutes reliably. There are also a few areas where, because of the way that the routes have changed, people would be able to access fewer places. So it's not all improvement. There is some degradation. So about half of residents would live in areas where access to jobs would increase, and 2% of residents would live in areas where access to jobs would decrease. So I guess there's a question of whether or not that's fair. For the purposes of this proposal, we've put it in here, but we are looking for comments about that. In alternative B, there's also an increase in access for a lot of people, but for significantly fewer people than in alternative A. And that's, again, because alternative B has fewer frequency improvements and more places where we've kept various splits and routes that keep frequencies lower. So in alternative B, about a third of county residents, 33%, would live in areas where access to jobs would increase significantly within 45 minutes. And slightly more people, 4% of residents, would live in areas where access would decrease. In terms of equity of these access improvements. I've told you in alternative A, about half of people would live in areas where access to jobs would increase. I want to stress the fact that we have paid attention to which areas those are and who lives there. And so the increases in access are actually positively affecting more Hispanic residents, more people of color, and more low-income residents than residents generally speaking. Same in alternative B. Lower improvements overall, but again, although there's just a third of people in alternative B who would live in areas with increased access, that's there'd be actually about 50% of Hispanic residents, 50% of people of color in general, and 40% of low-income residents who would see increased access. So that is what is on the table in terms of what Metro could do by the end of next year. I'll take you briefly through thoughts about what could happen in 2024 and beyond. We don't have a specific proposal to put on the table at this time, and that's for a specific reason. We want to know how people react to the proposals that are on the table for the end of this year, and we also want to understand what are people's priorities. So in this round of input, we're going to be asking you questions about that. We're going to be asking you to go to the survey and answer those questions and tell all your friends about it and have them answer the questions so we can learn what people want most. And then in the fall, we'll be designing what we think the future should look like based on those priorities. And so when we're looking at the future, we're looking at trying to understand what matters more to you. Are you more interested in some of these frequency improvements you're seeing more places with service every 15 minutes? Are you more interested in having more express regional service? Are you more interested in the east-west connection between the west and east side? Are you more interested in improving weekend service, evening service, something else? And so all these things, they're all things that Metro is aware of. They're all things that I think everyone knows about and wants to improve who's involved in this project. But we also know that we probably aren't going to be able to do them all, and we're certainly not going to be able to do them all in one fell swoop. So Metro needs to know which ones matter most so that they can focus on those first. In terms of how to provide input for this project. So we're having this public meeting today. I'll be done with my presentation in another couple minutes, and after that, we'll have a question and comment period. We're also going to have some in-person meetings focused on areas where we know that that Metro's had more trouble getting extensive public input in the past for all sorts of reasons. So we know for now that we have events in Watsonville on July 21st and 28th and in Live Oak on August 10th. That we're also following up on focus groups that we did in the last round of public outreach with the riders we talked to then and the stakeholder organizations we talked to then. And most importantly, there is an online survey that's open until August 10th that we would really like as many people as possible to go to and answer the questions on. So let us know what you think. Alternatives A and B as a whole, there's a lot to process, but in the survey, we really ask you about what's happening in different areas, and you only have to answer about the areas that you care about. And for the future, we just need to know what are your highest priorities. So all that's at the survey, and once we have your input in mid-August, we'll be summarizing that, presenting it to Metro's Board of Directors on August 25th so that we can get their input on what Metro should actually plan to do by this December. So here are the next steps. August 25th, the board tells us what to do based on what we heard from the public. Over the course of the fall, Metro is going to be working on developing and publishing new schedules to match what's going to change in December. And at the same time, we'll start working on a draft future network plan. In December is when the service changes are scheduled to take place. And then in early 2024, we'll be looking at publishing a future network plan that's going to prioritize the improvements to come. Thanks for your time. I really appreciate you all sitting through my presentation. Again, I know that's a lot of information to absorb. I look forward to hearing your questions and comments and answering as much as we can today.
Okay, Daniel, would you like to start with some of the questions that we've had in the chat?
Yes, Selena, whatever order you think is best.
Okay. We've had a couple of questions about Paracruz and how this plan addresses Paracruz.
Okay. The big picture is that this is really a fixed route study. So we are not directly studying changes to Paracruz. But at the same time, the minimum legal area that Santa Cruz Metro, the Paracruz has to serve is anywhere within 3/4 of a mile of a fixed route. I think with consistent daily service, and that area is definitely staying the same and or increasing slightly. So that's, I think, as much as I can say. John, do you have anything to add?
I do not. No, the Paracruz service area would remain the same under either alternative, and the same as today.
We had a question saying, you mean the 91X is coming back? And I think you addressed that it would be coming back under one alternative as a peak hour service. Daniel?
Yeah, so the 91X may come back in part, but that's part of the choices that Metro needs to make. So if I go back to, oh, sorry, I need to just get here. The map, the big picture maps here. So alternative A, to be clear, doesn't feature the 91X. So there's one possibility is that we don't restore the 91X. We focus on providing as much service as possible on the local routes that uses Highway 1 so that we minimize the travel time and also provide the highest possible frequencies in Watsonville. That's one possibility at the cost of no nonstop service. In alternative B, we would essentially be bringing back the 91X at least at peak hours as an express nonstop service from Watsonville to Santa Cruz. But the cost of that is that we would then not have the resources left over to run one of the buses that are going, the local buses from Watsonville to Santa Cruz. So there'd only be service every 60 minutes along Main Street out to Cabrillo and Capitola and Santa Cruz. So there may be a 91X or they may not be, and it kind of depends what you think is more important. Is it more important to have all day consistent frequency as fast as you can while still being a local route, or is it more important to have the 91X whenever it's possible?
We had a couple of questions about the routes, the lines 1 and 2. One question was about if they're both concentrated on Water Street, isn't it kind of a long walk from SoCal? And then someone else asked why the route numbers need to change. Why can't they stay the same for the
okay. I'll address the route numbers first. The route numbers don't have to change as much as they do here. The reason why they're changed on these maps is because we want to be really clear to everyone where we're doing things that are kind of similar to how they've been in the past and where there's significant change that you should be paying attention to. So these numbers 1, 2, 3, they may not be the final numbers, but they're indications that there's something to be looked at here. As far as the 1 and 2 both operating on Water Street, well, yes, it does mean a longer walk than what's there now. Whether that's too long is a subjective question that I won't answer for you. But right now, you know, most of Soquel Avenue is within a 1/4 mile of Water Street. And for an able-bodied adult, that's less than a 5-minute walk. Not everyone's able-bodied, not everyone's an adult. So I don't want to presume that about whoever asked that question. But the basic idea is the walk is not that long, but the benefits of having a bus every 15 minutes on Water Street are very significant. They mean that you can be on the east side, get a bus every 15 minutes, and catch another bus every 15 minutes in downtown if you're going towards the west side. And it means that you have a bus also that's going basically you can show up at a bus stop and be clear that you're not going to wait a very long time, whether you're going east or west.
We also had a couple questions about your how far can I travel in 45 minutes calculations. Someone wanted to know if that includes transfers, and someone else wanted to know if it takes into account bike share.
Okay. So the short answer to that is that it does include transfers. So basically, what the computer does is it says you tell it you're starting somewhere, and it figures out what the nearby bus lines are that you could walk to, and how far they could get you, and then how much further you could get to walking from the end of wherever that bus line takes you. If the A to B involves having the fastest way to get there involves a transfer, it builds that transfer in, and it builds the second wait for a second bus at the transfer. And actually, if you have to walk during that transfer, it builds that in too. The general assumption is that the amount of time you're going to wait is going to be on average half the time between two buses. So that's just saying if you show up randomly, you've got a 50% chance that the bus is coming within half the time between two buses. So if a bus comes every 30 minutes, we say you're waiting on average 15 minutes. Bus comes every 15 minutes, we're saying you're waiting on average 7.5 minutes. So that's one part of the question. It does include transfers. The other part of the question, bike share. No, it doesn't assume bike share. It's assuming that you're walking, because for a couple reasons. One is we do know that a number of people will access transit by bike, and that's certainly something we heard about. We also know that the new bike share system will allow a whole lot of trips using bike share that aren't possible right now, and that's great. But for most people, most places, most of the time, the way that they are getting to transit now and will get to transit in future is going to be walking. And so we want to make sure we're showing that. And that's also a more small c conservative assumption. It allows us to not overstate how far people will be able to get and not pretend like we're going to get benefits that don't actually exist for most people.
We have a couple of questions about Watsonville. One says, will the 72 and 75 routes in Watsonville be merged into one route, but with more frequency? And another question has to do with the circulator, and will the route that it is being converted into be free like the circulator is now?
Okay. For the 72 and 75, they would essentially operate as one merged route within the city limits. So basically, what you see in this map on the right now, I'm pointing at Watsonville Transit Center, and you can see that all the 72 and 75s, they would all go up Main Street, go up Green Valley Road, go by Freedom Center, and then continue out towards Amnesty. And they would be scheduled so that a 72 maybe comes on the hour and the 75 comes on the 30, so that they're essentially one route. You can pretend they're the same bus as long as you're within the city limits. Beyond the city limits, they would continue to split like they do now to serve the different areas out along Green Valley Road and in Amnesty. The other big thing to note is that part of what was needed to do this, but also might make the service simpler for most people, is that the end result is that you have buses that within city limits are always using the same roads in both directions. So that's the answer on the 72 and 75. On the 78 and the Watsonville Circulator, I guess I'm going to defer to Metro on that one. When I said that we're converting the Watsonville Circulator to it, what I meant is that the Watsonville Circulator does a lot of things that the other routes don't really do. And so that's kind of the same idea here with the 78, is getting to the other places that the other routes have a bit of trouble reaching. But John, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, sure. So the Watsonville Circulator was funded through a state grant for a limited term in both operations and as free fare. And so this plan assumes the Watsonville Circulator that doesn't continue. So no, the 78 wouldn't be a free route necessarily. But Metro is pursuing a number of free fare programs, including our free fare for youth, among others that you'll see in coming months. But in short answer, no, it wouldn't be a free route in replacement of a fare-free route in replacement of the Watsonville Circulator, since that was a limited term grant funded service.
Another question that has come up a few times that I can actually answer is, will these slides be available to participants? This presentation is being recorded. It'll be posted on the project website tomorrow. And I believe we can probably also post a PDF of the slides at that time so that everybody can look at the maps at their leisure.
And in addition, this presentation was given in parallel in Spanish, and so this document exists in Spanish and will be also posted in Spanish.
Thank you. We have a question about a person who asked about the community of Beach Flats, which they feel service has been eliminated to.
I'm going to need a little bit more detail about where that community is.
It is in the far south area of Santa Cruz. And I believe it's an area that's not served at the current time.
Okay, so this is a map of existing service. It's not on there?
No, I can jump in, Daniel. So
Okay.
Flats used to be served by a Route 3 that ran every 2 hours and was one of the least productive routes in terms of ridership in the metro system. And was eliminated during COVID due to lack of ridership and lack of resources. This plan doesn't envision its return simply because it served a one-way loop through Beach Flats. But please share that comment and feedback, and we'll evaluate the plan with that in mind.
There have been a number of other comments that I think probably relate more to your longer term plan, Daniel, that relate to serving the growing amount of housing in downtown Santa Cruz and how the system will encourage transit use among those new residents. John, is that something you want to say something about, or just note that that is something that will be addressed in the next phase?
Can you ask the question again? Sorry, Samantha.
I'm sorry. Someone had asked about the growing amount of housing in downtown Santa Cruz, the newly envisioned housing, and how Metro plans to attract those riders, since many of the apartments will have limited parking.
So at Pacific Station, specifically, every resident will have a free Metro transit pass, and we're working with the city of Santa Cruz to provide that benefit to the other affordable housing developments within the downtown area and possibly every new development. So that's one answer. And we do envision that the focus on frequency, at least in this alternative A that's on the screen now, would support ridership growth in the downtown area. You can see at least 2-3 routes converge at 15 minutes into downtown.
Yeah, I was going to add that the thing that makes transit useful and attractive is, you know, being easy to use, and the bus coming often enough that you can rely on it is a really key part of that. And so the higher frequency, both on the west side and on Water Street, are all reflecting that goal.
Perhaps now we can open it up to folks that want to ask their questions verbally. So if anyone would like to, if you just raise your, I see I have a couple of hands up, so I'm going to ask you to unmute and go ahead, Antonio.
Can you hear me? Huh?
Yes, we can.
Yes. My question would be is for the senior population that we have in the city of Watsonville, I'm concerned about, you know, the different areas. One of the areas that I don't see that much of is the Airport Boulevard all the way to, in a sense, to behind Safeway, in which you have a big concentration of seniors there, in which they use some of the buses there. I don't see any routes there, and how can you get there? That's my first question. And also in Green Valley Road, all the way to beyond Pajaro School, and then Pinto Lake, beyond Pinto Lake, what kind of routes they're gonna get for those population that we have there, all the way to the sheriff's station, you know, beyond Green Valley Road, and also to all the way to Pajaro High School, beyond, you know, beyond the main street that we have that little section there. And the other one is the East Lake. We have the senior village that we have there, which is the Bridge Street there, and Riverside. How you're going to be serving those populations, especially I think we're concerned for the handicap and our seniors that we have in the city of Watsonville. And that's my concern. What kind of routes, you know, how often you're going to be there? Because mostly you say, you know, 30 minutes, but I don't see any routes that really address to that population and concerns that we have.
Okay. Let me try to take those one at a time, and I may have to ask you again, but I think I can remember all three.
Okay.
Your first question, are you talking about the big housing developments that are kind of behind Freedom Center up here?
No, this
right now.
Yeah, that's one. No, that's the one. The Airport Boulevard is the one, you know, where, you know, you have the Freedom Center, which you had Safeway there.
Yep.
Beyond that,
yeah,
is all the way that, you know, behind Safeway, that's where you have all the city housing there and that kind of stuff, you know. And then, you know, it's the same street that will go all the way to Pinto Lake and then to the sheriff's station, you know, that kind of stuff.
Understood. So what's happening? Basically, we've tried to get as many places as possible, as many routes as possible, converging towards the really high demand point around Freedom Center Safeway. In terms of the housing that's near there, if you're behind the Freedom Center, in these alternatives, you'd be in both of them on the 72 and 75, which are a bus every 30 minutes that actually doesn't take Airport Boulevard. That bus takes Green Valley Road, Main Street, downtown. So you'd actually have a lot of connections to all the main retail destinations in Watsonville from around there. Past this area, the 72 and 75 wouldn't change. They'd be essentially as they are right now, out Green Valley Road and out Amnesty. And that wouldn't change. I don't know if that gets to all the places you mentioned, but that's what's on the map right now. We can certainly take that as a comment if there are more places that need to be reached. So that's one of your questions. Another one was about Bridge Street and the seniors down there. Yeah, so basically that area is currently served by Route 79. And that area would remain served by Route 79, just in a slightly different way. So first of all, instead of having a bus every 60 minutes, you'd have a bus every 30 minutes. It would still only be served in one direction. The other direction would take Lake Street, but basically you could keep in that area, because we know there's such a high concentration of seniors. It's actually one of the areas where we've kept a pretty significant deviation from the main path to minimize additional walking distances. So people can take a bus, it's coming every 30 minutes. They can ride it out or they can ride it back into town as they need to. And your third point, I'm afraid I've forgotten what it was.
No, it's the one that, you go beyond, College Avenue over there, by, and that area, you go straight down. What kind of bus will go all the way down to the Santa Cruz Fairgrounds, past that, and then college has been before that.
That's the 79. So okay. The 79 will, basically the 79 right now does this really complicated thing, right? Where it goes out beach and then by bridge and then goes out lake and then comes back. But when it comes back, actually, no, it doesn't even go, sorry, it goes out beach. It's so complicated, I can't even follow it. It goes out beach, then it takes lake, then it goes out, then it comes back, then it takes bridge, then it zips around, does a knot on itself to Martinelli, comes back in town. Instead, the bus will come twice as often. It'll go out beach, it'll go to bridge, it'll go out lake, come back into town via lake. That's what's in these in these alternatives, but certainly we're open to comments, whatever the community wants to say about that, and to hear the.
And I believe Daniel was showing weekend service to the fairgrounds, continuing on East Lake Avenue, that Brown 79 route that keeps going. Sometimes.
Correct. Thank you. Yes, that wouldn't change. Weekend service to the fairgrounds.
And also the other thing that I just want to ask, how about the services for people in wheelchairs, handicap, and people who are blind, people with disabilities? You're going to be providing any type, the buses will have all that the equipment and be able to serve them?
No change to any of that.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that, that can happen. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, let's move on to Sean. Sean, I've just asked you to unmute if you'd like to ask your question.
Yes. Whenever plans like this are brought to the public, there's an expectation that it's going to happen, and roughly within the time frame that's projected. We all understand that everything always takes longer to build than is projected, and prices always go up. Cost of making changes. But when Metro and Paracruz had a much needed increase in budget, Manukonig in District 1 put a motion forward in the RTC to divert that much needed funding. Since then, Metro's been given an extremely long list of shortcomings by the Santa Cruz County Commission on Disability. Those are not new things. Those are the same problems last year. I had a friend who even had to buy his own tie downs, the most basic equipment he needs as a wheelchair user. And if I'm right, there's still no consultant for disabilities in Metro. So I'm obviously presenting Metro's shortcomings there. When about $1 million was diverted from the Metro budget by Manu, well, what can we do as your customer base? What can we do to help ensure that funding is never taken away from Paracruz Metro again? How can we help you help us and kids, working people, and people with disabilities?
John, I'm going to have to defer to you on that one.
Thanks for that comment, Sean. That stung last year when that funding was diverted. It wasn't just Manukonig, it was, I think, every board of supervisor that voted to divert that specific funding. Thankfully, we've since received over $60 million in federal and state funds for zero emission buses, which is what that funding was, what we had requested it for. So we've done okay since then. But how can you help? Show up to meetings like this, show up at the RTC, show up at the County Board of Supervisors. This plan will be presented to our board. I'm going to just say it has less to do with the other regional bodies in the area. But as we talk about implementing physical changes on the corridors to make buses move faster throughout Santa Cruz County, and I'm talking about bus boarding islands, that the bus may stop in lane and not get out of traffic, bus only lanes, queue jumps, transit signal priority, those types of things that really make a huge difference in getting people from A to B faster and more reliably, that are often contentious. That's where we're going to need a lot of support to get those types of changes across the finish line. And we've received, again, in the state and federal funding, significant funding to make some of these changes. We're in a separate planning process to do that. So that's when we'll need the support of the public to rally behind moving the bus faster through Santa Cruz County. Thank you for the comment.
Okay, Ryan Meckel, I think you were next up. Would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. This is very exciting. Either one of these would be so much better than what we have right now. Just with regards to some of, especially Alternative A in the city of Santa Cruz, I personally think Alternative A is better, but I think that the removal of the 10 on a high street might be a difficult pill for some to swallow, along with the consolidation of some of the east side routes. has there been any discussion around adding bike share stations where these routes would be removed? So I apologize, where these routes would be removed so that people could, get downtown or get to campus or connect with the routes that are going to be a better service for the smaller number of people that will no longer have access to those routes. I think it would make it a bit easier to swallow that pill and make the changes that Metro really does need.
So we're in touch with the planning staff from the city of Santa Cruz and from RTC on this. I don't think that we explicitly discussed that particular option, but it certainly sounds like something that should get discussed more. And so we'll make a note of that. And thank you for the comment.
Thank you.
Riley Hartman, if you would unmute.
Yeah, I first want to say I appreciate everyone else bringing up access issues, because that was my question and concern as well, where there's a lot being done to prioritize improving bus access to low-income people, people of color, and that's so critical, and I really appreciate that. But I'm concerned that there hasn't been as much of an explicit emphasis on prioritizing disabled residents, because especially in the conversations around alternative A, and just in general about how a half mile isn't far to walk, that's something that wouldn't necessarily be an issue. We could add, and even the suggestion of adding e-bikes to High Street as a replacement is like, a lot of people cannot walk half a mile. A lot of people cannot use a bike as an alternative there. And so I guess my question is also, what are you currently doing to make sure that these new changes will be accessible? And what are you currently, and have you been consulting with any advisory bodies around disability and accessibility in making these plans?
I can comment on the groups that we've been interfacing with around disabilities. We've had a rather large stakeholder group that's been informing us and have brought up some of the same issues that you have. So I appreciate you raising those. I don't know if John or Daniel wanted to add something.
I guess I want to add, just because I don't want to make really clear, we're not saying that a quarter mile or a half mile is definitely a distance that everyone can walk. I want to make really clear that's not something we're saying, but we are trying to have some kind of yardstick that helps us understand whether or not service stays close to a lot of people or not. And you can certainly critique that yardstick, and I totally understand that. I don't think I, as a consultant, should judge whether any individual is able to walk a quarter or a half mile. It's just a general measure. So I do think that if there's really significant concern about the idea of walking a quarter of a mile, for example, the Water Avenue to Soquel, so Water Street into Soquel Avenue, right? That's something that's worthy of comment and that should get discussed and that needs to be debated. It's certainly something we spent a lot of time debating when we were drawing these routes. I do think, though, that we are, unfortunately, the larger reality is that we're planning all this service in the context of there's only so much operating funding and there are only so many drivers. And so we're trying to see what we can do within those constraints. I think everyone who's involved in the project agrees that the total amount of service that can be provided by the end of this year is not enough service for this community, and that there's a lot more that's needed. And a lot of these issues are solvable with that, but that's not available by the end of this year. So if by the end of this year, the priority is we can't be adding places where people walk a quarter mile more, then that means that we can't be deciding to consolidate services to get higher frequency. And maybe if that's the message that needs to come across, then please make that message come across in your responses to the survey. And thank you for your comment right now.
Rohan, would you unmute?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes, please speak up a little louder.
I have a couple of questions. The first one is related to the implementation date of December. Now, anyone who has been to the UCSC campus recently or ridden Route 18 is desperate for these service changes, so they're not stranded on the side of the road with their groceries. I know the reason why I say to implement this in December rather than at the start of the fall for the September service change was to avoid too many confusion or too many changes. would it be possible to move up the implementation date specifically for the UCSC routes so it lines up with the start of the school year instead of making a change in the middle of the school year?
I'll take that first question, Daniel. So in September, we should have delivery of 8 to 10 new articulated buses for use on UCSC routes, which should help with overcrowding. And we are trying to add some additional trips on the 18 and 19. So it wouldn't be the full all day 15, but we are trying to add some trips. So it's coming, Rohan.
Yay. Okay, my next question is related to the Route 10 being removed in alternative A. So in the report where it shows the productivity of each route, it shows that Route 10 has a significantly higher productivity than Route 20, yet Route 10 is being proposed being cut and Route 20 is being kept. And Route 20 also has a lot of duplicative service. Western Drive is shared with the 18. The coastal campus is served by TAPS's West Side Connector route, and the Boardwalk area is served with the 19. So I just want some more info on the rationale for why the 20 is being kept in alternative A, but not the 10.
It comes down to the coastal campus and having an all-day service at the coastal campus, which was perceived as an important thing by the people from UCSC involved in this process.
Okay, thank you for that information. That clears it up. And
maybe, I'm sorry, that may seem a little glib. I don't want to say that, like, I think both routes 10 and Route 20 have certain things going on, right? What Route 10 has going on is that it's clearly the shortest of the current available paths into campus. And that's probably why it's more productive than the 18 and the 19 and the 20. Well, it's not more productive than the 18, just than the 20. So that it's a short path. So if you happen to get there at Pacific Station right when the 10's there, you're clearly going to take the 10, and that makes it productive. However, both the 10 and the 20 have significantly less going on in their immediate vicinity than the 18 and the 19. And the 10 doesn't, in addition, have one specific, really significant destination along it, whereas the 20 has the coastal campus, which is located in a place that's rather difficult to serve and basically is unlikely to be served unless Route 20 is there. So that's the more complete answer to that.
Okay, thank you. And the last question is actually sort of related to that. Have there been discussions with TAPS about any of the areas that are losing service or any of the areas that need more frequency about TAPS providing a shuttle service there with their buses in order to supplement the metro service off campus?
There have not been direct discussions about that. It was one of the issues in deciding about Route 20 and whether Route 20 should remain. But it wasn't the only one. And I think that, yeah, I'll leave it there for now. John, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Just that from what we've heard from TAPS is they're struggling with some of the issues Metro has been in terms of hiring operators, keeping their buses in a state of good repair. And the idea of expanding service was not really on the table for them. But we can continue that conversation for sure.
All right, thank you.
Okay, next up is Queenie Jimenez. Queenie, if you'd like to unmute, and I think you're on the phone, so you use *6 to unmute. There you go. Queenie, would you like to go ahead with your comment? Okay, maybe she stepped away. So
I'm here.
Oh, there you are. Okay. Go ahead. Queenie, we can't hear you. So I am going to move on and we'll come back to you in a bit if maybe you get your issues dealt with. Elizabeth Madrigal, please.
Yeah, so thanks for the presentation so far and offering the alternatives. Two main questions from my end. I've noticed pretty much a daily transit rider. I live in Seabright, and as you all have said through this, it's just extremely hard to get to the west side without having to wait, say, 30 minutes at the Santa Cruz Transit Center. But also, like going to San Jose, then coming back to Santa Cruz. For example, there's like the bus coming back from San Jose will get to the Santa Cruz Metro Center at 7:30, but then the 68 bus the last one of the day too, that goes through Seabright, leaves the Santa Cruz Metro at 7:30. So I want to ask if there's going to be an overall adjustment of the transit system and just really comparing those times with one another, because there's just a lot of routes that seem to have no interface with other routes that really should.
So to answer your question, you can see if you download the report, you'll be able to see kind of the general hours of service that are intended for each route. And overall, the idea is to have slightly more consistent hours from one route to another, and also to have routes that end maybe a little later in the evening, not a lot later. I don't want to overpromise, and it is dependent on operator count. But to avoid that kind of issue, some of that's going to come down to detail in the schedule development that we're not at yet. But it is a kind of issue that we're certainly aware of.
And in both of these alternatives, the segment of the 68 that serves Seabright, at least the Seabright Avenue, would double in frequency. So there's an improvement there.
That's right. And so because in alternative A, well, you've doubled frequency out to Seabright Avenue. And even in B, you can get, I guess, at least to Broadway and Seabright every 30 minutes. What that ends up meaning is that there'll still be some long waits. You'll be times when you may be unlucky, but there won't be times where you'll be waiting a whole hour.
Mm-hmm. Great to hear. And then my second question, so I agree with others that alternative A, really too, and what's been discussed and just what it means for equity is the way to go. But with that being said, I know only 91X is only included within alternative B. Is there any possible way to include that within alternative A? I just see those as being two separate things, because it's it should still be the case that the 91X should run, because even the 71, 69W, or 69A, they're, well, not completely different routes, but it just takes so much longer on any of those other routes.
Yeah, understood. I think the way we're doing this is, in this presentation and in the report, we show you A and B as like complete packages, but those packages are really intended to help explain it. In the survey, we're asking questions about like each part of the package, and you only have to answer about the ones that matter to you. So in fact, in the end of this process, what we're hoping to see is from the input, which parts of each alternative people like and don't like, and to mix and match. However, there are going to be some real limits to what we can mix and match, and those limits are the operating funds and the operator count. So I think we're well aware as a project team of the strong desire for the 91X to return and of exactly what it does by providing those nonstop trips. And that's why it's at least partly back in alternative B. At the same time, as much as it is a needed service and a service that certainly would have some users, we also know that the 69 and 71s have historically had higher ridership, and so not that the 91's less legitimate, but at some point we have to make priorities. So I think some of that will depend on the comments we get and what people think in terms of that inner east-west countywide kind of connection, whether they prefer what's being put forth in A or B.
Daniel, I might add that in the chat, we had a comment about what is the expected travel time between Watsonville and downtown Santa Cruz under the new route structure, not the 91X, but with the 1 and the 2.
I don't know that I can answer that precisely at this time, but I guess I can give you a big picture look at it. What I can tell you is that it's going to be faster than the 71 because it's not going to go through this whole 2-lane rural road on Freedom Boulevard between Watsonville and Aptos. I can tell you it will probably be somewhere in between. It's difficult to compare. What I can tell you is we're taking the fastest possible path out of Watsonville on Main Street every 30 minutes in Alternative A, using the fastest path on Highway 1 to get to Cabrillo. And then after that, it's kind of a local bus. So it'll probably be somewhat less time. You're still going to be subject to traffic. It's not going to be perfect, but we're trying to do as much as we can while serving all the bus stops where there's a lot of demand. John, I know there's a parallel effort at increasing speed on the long east-west roads. Do you want to?
Yeah, I was just going to jump in with that. So I believe currently with our existing schedules, it's about 65 minutes on either the 1 or the 2 in midday. So not peak times, which is about 15 minutes shorter than the 71 end to end as it is today. And we are doing a separate study. It's called Rapid Corridors, and we'll be in outreach of that and that study later this summer. And that's looking at a couple of things to speed up both routes 1 and 2 between Watsonville and Santa Cruz. So bus stop relocation, making sure that we are putting bus stops on the far side of intersections, which just makes them go faster through traffic. Creating space for transit to move around traffic, for our buses to move around traffic where that's available. Implementing transit signal priority where the bus actually can speak to the traffic signal to extend the green time if it's running behind schedule. General bus stop relocation. So currently the 71 bus spends half of its time stopped on the corridor, just wheel stopped at a bus stop. And that's due to a lot of things, but typically, or more than anything, it's due to the number of bus stops on the corridor. So we're looking at spacing about 1/3 of a mile, but we'll be going to the public with that idea soon. But the idea is to speed up both of those routes between Watsonville and Santa Cruz.
Thank you, John. We've got like 4 more comments and then we'll probably be out of time. But Bonnie Gutierrez, would you unmute and ask your question?
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay. Hi, thank you very much. I'm Bonnie Gutierrez from La Selva Beach, and our community really appreciates adding La Selva into this map. What I'm trying to figure out on the map, when it finishes La Selva, it heads down San Andreas. Now, does it get onto Highway 1 at that point or go over Bonita to Freedom and link with that bus that goes to Watsonville and up to Santa Cruz? Or I can't tell with the brown line, what does it do?
So in the current drawing, Bonnie, it would go to San Andreas and then to Highway 1, basically direct to State Park Drive and Cabrillo College.
Okay. All right, and that is running. It'd be 75 minutes?
It'd be every 90. So extending the route out to La Selva Beach makes it longer. Okay. And we've tried to minimize that impact, but it does mean that basically it would run every 90 instead of every 75.
Okay, perfect. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, next I have Les Forster. I'm going to ask you to unmute, Les, and ask your question.
Good, thank you. Thank you all for putting this together. It's very informative and I appreciate all the work that's gone into it. My question is around what kind of outreach or communication has been with the County Office of Education and with the bigger school districts in the county to maybe promote K-12 ridership?
The school districts have been involved in our stakeholder meetings. We've been talking mostly about service and making sure that service is where it needs to be, not so much about promotion. John, I might let you answer that because I know you guys have implemented free fare for K through 12.
Yeah, we have a free K through 12 program that started in April. And our marketing director has been in contact with school districts to promote that. We'll gear up more strongly for it in August as we roll into the new school year.
Okay, thanks. And we'll keep spreading the word about that too. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
And Zenon, if you would unmute. You are we have one more question after you.
Hey, how you doing? I just had a couple of questions, and forgive me if I missed this earlier because I had to hop off for another meeting, but related to the routes that are going up to Bonnie Doon and to Davenport. I know something that we had talked about in some of the stakeholder sessions was about replacing that service with replacing that fixed service with a more kind of like on-demand door-to-door service, considering the rural nature and how a lot of the communities up there can't really be served by traditional bus stops. And I was just wondering how that kind of factored into the discussions when it came to deciding to keep those routes going up into the mountains.
So I guess in the short term, we weren't looking at making changes to those routes. We know that there's not a lot of service on them, but what's there is very important to the people that are using it. And there's not much you can do. 10% of 5 buses a day is a half a bus. So there wasn't much we could do with what's available right now. I think there are real questions about what could be done in the longer term. You know, there was some discussion internally about whether you could, instead of having these 3 funny routes that do different things in the afternoon and in the morning, whether there's a way to make that 1 or 2 all-day routes. I think we don't have any final conclusions on that. I think I'll let Metro answer on whether or not an on-demand option could be on the table. John.
Yeah, sure. It hasn't been envisioned as part of this process. We did pilot an on-demand service during COVID when demand dipped on paratransit. And it ended up being too much demand, even for our paratransit operation. And in the North Coast area, there's only certain street roads that cut through. So a fixed route actually ends up probably being more productive and a better investment than on demand, but it's something we can continue to explore. We did pilot general public on-demand service for a year, and it wasn't something that we could sustain simply because the levels of demand were too high for the vans to serve.
Sure, I appreciate that. Yeah, I guess I just wanted to explore it because I know that's a lot of revenue hours that are spent going on a lot of really long journey that could be replaced by maybe some smaller services, considering the ridership numbers up there are pretty low. And then also, I kind of want to jump back to can you go to the UCSC slide?
This one?
Yeah, that'd be great. I had a question about late night service, because I'm looking at the actual report that was put out on the website and the frequency chart. And I'm seeing that for at least both the 19 and the 18, it pretty much looks like all service ends at 11 p.m., including weekend service. And I was just wondering, I know it was something that was mentioned in the report. And also, I guess you guys just said before that you were still looking into what the scheduling chart would be, but just want to emphasize the importance of having late night service going up to campus, especially. I think, not even just from a transportation, but from a safety issue, there should be buses going up to campuses when bars close, full stop, because I know a lot of folks that end up having to make dangerous decisions because they don't have transportation alternatives. So even if it's just one bus that leaves every hour and a half, I really implore it to go towards a later time when, concerts at Catalyst go out or when the bars close, kind of thing, especially for students. And then also I wanted to second the comments from someone who was talking earlier about asking TAPS about making that connection service to Coastal Campus with their own shuttles. I know it's something they've done in the past. And especially if we're considering replacing the 18 and 19 with 15-minute service, there's actually a potential for the TAPS service to literally just go from kind of like the corner of Western and Mission, just straight back to Coastal Campus, and just make that loop so people can transfer onto the Metro service. Because if it's coming that frequently, then it's fine to actually just have it terminate there and have people make a transfer. So that could save a lot of service hours on the 20, which I know is a low ridership route that could be reallocated even further into maybe saving the 10, considering it has a lot shorter of a travel time between campus and downtown, which is where the main services, main amount of people are trying to go. And I also wanted to second the comments from Ryan earlier about looking into replacing bus stops on routes that are lost with bike share stations. I think if you put some bike share stations right where the bus stops used to be, you've already got the right of way in the street to build the corrals. That could be a really beneficial way of going ahead and bridge the gap. And then finally, I know one person earlier was talking about accessibility, especially as it relates to cutting out some of the routes. And I just wanted to implore Paracruz as well as a great option that Metro offers for folks that have disability issues and issues with being able to walk that quarter of a mile to half a mile to buses. And that's door-to-door service from Metro that for folks that are either, I think, mentally or physically disabled. So I just wanted to pour on that. And then there was one other thing I'm trying to remember, but I think it was in relation to kind of like the physical improvements that were kind of being discussed. And I was just wondering, one thing that's in the long range development plan for UCSC is the transit hubs. I know there's one listed at East Remote and West Remote. And obviously we know that the bus service on campus, I mean, 70% of the time it takes to get a bus from downtown to campus and back is just spent on campus because of all the congestion up there. So just wondering if you had conversations with TAPS about that part of the LRDP and maybe considering giving TAPS a bus or two so that they could beef up just an on-campus core service, and then Metro could just go to the different hubs, which would really boost frequencies along the actual parts going through town.
Okay, there's like 8 questions there. So,
yes.
I'm gonna not address all of them. I'm gonna acknowledge and thank most of thank you for your comments on most of them, but I'm gonna address maybe 2 points. One is late night. Fully acknowledging the reality of what you're saying. The issue, there's a couple things that are at play here. One is, again, we're operating within the constraints of the resources available this year. And so there's only so many hours to spread around the county. And so the general intention in these alternatives was to maintain more or less similar spans as to what's there now, making some changes here and there at the edges to try to make things more regular from one route to another and from one higher demand route to another higher demand route. And so as a result, you're seeing that service that's not going later. I want to emphasize that it is not trivial to ask your transit agency to keep one bus operating 2 hours after the entire rest of the system has closed. That one bus operating requires the support from base. It means base has to stay open. It means there's a whole lot of staff that have to keep coming. It's a much more expensive bus to run than that same bus running 2 hours earlier. So I just want to say that to say we hear you, but it's not that easy. You can't just say that. Regarding your last point about what if the frequent buses just went kind of to the edge of campus, and then you had service on campus that was frequent, so it'd be easy to transfer. That's certainly an option that was discussed and considered. The big problem with that is that you're essentially, if you do that, you are asking entire busloads of people to get off right when the bus is most full and dropping them off in places at the edge of campus where there, in most cases, isn't that much immediately there. And it, at least with the infrastructure that's available right now, that was not considered a viable option. We want to keep the full buses full to the point where all those people are going and not make people lose time in the middle of nowhere. So thank you. I know you had many more comments, and many of them were quite good, and they've been noted.
And we have one last comment from Faina, and then we will call it a night. So Faina, if you'd like to unmute.
Thank you so much for all your work on this and sticking with it. All right, I'm gonna bring you to Midtown Live Oak area. The alternative A eliminates my bus stop, which I am willing to give up for service every 30 minutes. But I have some questions. Okay, I'm sorry, I lied. Not Midtown. I'm going to, it looks like it's part of the Santa Cruz map. We're looking at Live Oak and
that area is a little bit cut up in these maps, but
yeah. Okay. So alternative A, I really like the every half an hour service. That's clearly better than splitting up and going 2 directions. But if we're going to start this in December, I heard rumors that Murray Street Bridge is going to be closed in December. So I'm wondering if we have plans for that. It would be really a bummer to start this new route right when that bridge closes. And if maybe we want to route it slightly differently or start this route later after that bridge reopens. Because I can't have no service. I need to be able to get downtown.
okay. So on that point, this was an issue that got discussed. My understanding is that, yes, that is the current timing on the Murray Street Bridge replacement, but also that the Murray Street Bridge replacement is something that's been on the books to come for quite a while. And it may happen in December or it may happen later. And so for the purposes of the maps that are being shown here, we wanted to show the route that we think the bus should take with the streets that are currently available. If the Murray Street Bridge, or when, because it will get replaced at some point, gets replaced, at that point, the buses that rely on it would inevitably have to go up 7th and Capitola Road to get further into town. So we did look at some contingencies for that. They're not published here, but the big picture is that, you know, there'd be something that involves 7th and Capitola and water eventually getting back down to Broadway. But that's not what we think the bus should do. It's what the bus may have to do whenever that happens.
Awesome. And then last question, do you have projected times for these? Like, what's the time difference between being able to get from 7th to downtown on the 66 versus what it would be on the 3?
We don't have exact projected times. I think you can generally make the assumption that buses to the extent you see the speed that buses run at now isn't going to change a lot by the end of this year. So you should, if you're thinking about this, you should sort of assume that buses are going to serve about the same number of stops and run at about the same speeds. And so to the extent there are time savings, they really come from the frequency. And so they're not less time on the bus, they're less time waiting for the bus. They're less time after you've looked at the app and seen the buses coming in 59 minutes.
Yeah. Or after you've missed the bus and you get to walk because that's faster than waiting to the next one.
That's right. So that's to the extent there are time saving, that's where they come from. It's not because we think that buses are magically going to get faster by the end of the year. They probably won't.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much for all your work.
And Daniel, Queenie Jimenez still wants to ask her question. We weren't able to hear her before, but I'm going to give it a quick try right now to see if we can, and then we will close this meeting out. Queenie, if you'd like to unmute and try again.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, my name's Queenie Jimenez. I'll make this as quick as possible. I want to let you know I am a writer on I have been on almost all of the lines for 11 years. I unfortunately got in an accident 3 years ago, so now I rely totally on Paracruz. So to that person who said that Paracruz is an option, it is. However, it's not reliable. It's just like Metro. Today I had to cancel my appointments because it didn't show up. I've had to wait 3 hours. So this is why it's important that beach flaps be replaced, even though I cannot travel more than a quarter of a mile or even under a quarter mile because I'm in a manual wheelchair. I've had to turn down jobs because I'm unable to get to Metro from Santa Cruz Beach Boardwalk all the way to Watsonville where the jobs are appearing. So I wanted to make that clear. Also, I want to know what survey you all are talking about, because I would love to give my personal opinions to this survey. That I know that beach flats, nobody listens to us anyway, but you know what? I want to get my voice heard and I want it out there. And I want to compliment all the people who addressed the ADA situation. Okay, so please, I'm going to submit my email to the moderator and I want to be included in these emails and I want to know how I could participate in more meetings and who will hear my voice as far as Paracruz goes and as far as these lines, bus lines go, because beach flats was totally eliminated and we are low income Hispanic folks. Thank you.
Thanks, Queenie. And I want to second the specific point you made about paratransit versus fixed route. Certainly paratransit is a necessary and also legally required service that all transit agencies have to provide. And it's certainly better than if there wasn't paratransit. But there are a number of challenges associated with using paratransit, frankly, even in the most reliable system. And there is certainly an argument for considering the needs of people with mobility limitations in designing a fixed route network. We're not just hand waving it. So we understand that when we say that in this alternative, you would have to walk farther, that for a certain number of people, that's a non-trivial ask. And so that's why we want the comments. It's we have to understand how the community views these trade-offs as a whole. And we really appreciate all the input that we get about that. So thanks. And for the survey itself, by the way, I put the slide with the link to it right here. That's actually the link to the project website, scmtd.com/reimaginemetro. And if you go there, there are links to the survey and it's available in English and in Spanish. And if the survey asks a certain number of fairly specific questions, and if you get to the end and the specific thing you wanted to comment on wasn't there, there's an opportunity at the end of the survey to provide open-ended comment as well on whatever topic you think matters.
Okay, Daniel, I think that wraps it up for the evening. What a terrific group.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great evening.
Good night, everyone.